After completing my 10th class exams in 1979, my father suggested that I go and help my father's uncle and learn astrology. Mathematics being my favorite subject, I learned the calculations. My grandfather taught me how to calculate the inclinations of each planet and how to calculate the lagna and the meridian center MC. And he gave me some birth charts to draw. Thus, I learned how to draw the birth charts first and showed interest in predictions. So my grandfather told me some predictions, some of the tips that he usually uses for predictions, and after learning those tips I documented some of them. I verified with my father. While my father and my grandfather have laid the foundation for me to get interested in astrology, for almost a decade or 2 decades, I didn't show any interest.
Welcome to Shastikara's Astrological series. As usual, for the past 6 to 7 years, I am posting a number of videos in my YouTube channel, and which are free for most of them. And apart from that, earlier to that, I did post some scribed articles in the scribed website, and which I came to know that people are getting charged for downloading my articles. Recently, I started a website www.karraastrology.com. I'll repeat again www.karraastrology. Karra Astrology is all one word. Karraastrology.com is my new website, and most of the information pertaining to me, whether it is in the articles in the WordPress or in Scribd or the recent YouTube presentations that had been posted in my channel, all of those are available in my website. And apart from that, I started a new paid consultation, and the payments will be when I tell my what is my fees. The payment should be paid either to an orphanage in India. I will provide the address for that payment details, or to the homeless center here in New Jersey. So for those who are residing in India, they will be paying to an orphanage in Hyderabad, and for those who are residing outside India, they have to pay to a homeless center here in New Jersey. So if you are interested to get paid consultation, please visit my website and click the contact me button, and then provide all the information over there. To the extent possible, I will be responding at the most within 3 to 5 business days. Thank you very much. I'm hoping that you will like my presentations, and this is some presentation which I'm going to post it within as soon as I can.
Welcome to Shastrikara's Astrological series. In this presentation, I'm going to take an exclusive, unique example. Generally speaking, we come across people who were married at least 2, 3, or maybe even 4 times in their life. 4 times got married in their whole lifetime, but there are exceptional people who got married more than 4 times. In this example, the native is Larry King. He died on 23rd January 2021, and he's a celebrity here in United States, and he got married 8 times, ladies. He got married to 7 ladies 8 times. That's approximately like getting one married to one of the lady, divorcing her, and then remarrying again. So altogether there were 8 marriages for this particular native, and that's the reason why I picked up this native's chart as a unique chart, and trying to do an astrologically, from an astrological perspective, analyze to find out what were the planetary combinations and planetary um, rules, astrological rules that were followed that made this particular native to get married almost 8 times, 7 or 8 times approximately. Okay, so this example is only meant for educational purposes. Please consider this presentation as an educational instructional video, and I have no intention of harming anyone or insulting anyone. Please consider this for your, if you want to get more knowledge about astrology, Hindu astrology, the astrological principles that I use to predict it, and some of these unique situations, use this particular one. And thank you very much for watching this video again. So when it comes to analyzing the chart, let's do the chronological analysis. Even though it is, this presentation is about looking for the possibility for multiple marriages, or analyzing this particular native, the reason, astrological reason why the native had to go through multiple marriages. Even though it is pertaining to, the event is pertaining to marriages, basically I would emphasize to look at, or there are certain houses that one has to go through it, and in a chronological order. And the very first thing that I do is to look at the first house. First house states is the tanustanamu, that means about self. So when we look at the first house, what we will be knowing is this particular native's mental awareness about his or her views about marriage. Here, we are doing the analysis for multiple marriages. So we look at from the first house, the mental awareness about and the native's views about marriage and living as a family person, rather than being a single unmarried bachelor or a spinster, or being a sage or a saint, or not getting married for the remaining part of his or her life. So that's the reason why you have to first look at the first thing you have to look at is look at the first house. When you look at the first house, this is the common thing that I do for all the houses. Based upon the house that I look at, the first thing I do is look at the house lord, and in the natal chart, in which house is that natal the first house lord residing, and with which planet is that first house lord co-joined, and which houses is the first house lord aspecting. And not, when I say the houses it is aspecting, it I also look at what other planets are residing in the houses that it has, that in the aspected houses what other planets are residing. So once you prepare this particular, gather this information, I do for all the houses. Right now we are talking about the first house. So first, once I do gather this information, the first house, then it will give you an idea about the natives, the self awareness, and especially when we look at from a marriage perspective or being a family person perspective, or is there a possibility for this particular native to remain unmarried or have a chaotic marital life. All these things we can see from the very first house, and then note down the contents. Once the first house analysis is done, the very next thing that I do is, since this topic is about multiple marriages, the very next thing that I do is look at the seventh house. The seventh house is always important when you look for the possibility for a native to get married. And here, just like the reason is, when there is a possibility for a native to get married, you got to look at from two angles. The angle one is from ascendant, what is the seventh house, and that is the destiny. Angle two is from Chandra Lagna, that means native's natal moon position. Wherever the natal moon is residing, assume that as the first house, and then do the analysis of the seventh house from there. And the reason why you have to do is by looking from the ascendant, you'll know the ability for the native to get married or not is in his or her destiny. And then by looking from the Chandra Lagna, you will know whether the native is inclined, mentally prepared to get married or not. Just like all other, just like I do the very first, the first house, even for this seventh house also, I follow the same principle, which is like who is the seventh house lord, what is in which house natal, what is the natal position of the seventh house lord, and then what planets it is co-joined with, which houses it is aspecting, and the houses that it is aspecting, are there any other planets there in that house. So it's the same procedure that I followed for the first house is the same one I follow for all the houses. While looking at the first house and the seventh house, when we are analyzing the possibility for a native to get married or analyzing the reason why the native had multiple marriages, the first house and the seventh house are the primary houses that needs to be analyzed. Then comes the secondary part of it. Even though the primary might be strong, but if the secondaries are not that strong enough, then there will be some sort of a drag from the secondary houses, and which might delay the event to happen that is initiated by the primary house. So that's the reason why you have to look at the secondary houses. In secondary houses, there are 3 secondary houses that I look at, of which the very first one is the second house. Second house stands for Kutumbasthanamu when you are looking from the marriage perspective. So the reason why Kutumbasthanamu is needed to verify, check the second house, is because Kutumbasthanamu means it's the ability, native's ability to start a family. So you have to check it from the ascendant whether it is in the native's the destiny, whether the native has the ability to start a family, and then from the Chandra Lagna whether the native is mentally prepared to start a family. If this particular thing, if the ability to start a family is lacking in native's chart, especially from the destiny perspective, then the possibility is very high for the native either to remain unmarried or get married, divorced, or become a widow, and thus the native will not have the ability to start a family. And like I said earlier, for the first and the seventh houses, even for the second house also, I do exactly the same thing. Look at the second house lord, what is the natal position, what planets it co-joined, and in which houses it aspects, and what planets are there in that aspected houses. So I gather the same information that I gathered the first and the seventh houses. Even for the second house also, I will gather the same information. The next secondary while doing the secondary houses for analysis, the second one that I look is the fourth house. The reason fourth house means because fourth house is called the Sukhasthanamu, or having a home life environment. So it is like from an ascendant, does the native has a destiny, is it written in the native's destiny to have a home life environment or not? And then from Chandra Lagna, is the native willing to have a home life environment? Home life environment means having a family, and then having children, and having the routine life that is pertaining as a responsibility as a husband or a wife, the responsibility as a parent. So this is altogether comes under the home life environment. If any of these things are, if the home life environment is lacking for the native from the destiny, then the chances are extremely high for the native to remain unmarried or get married, get divorced, or become a widow and remain single for whatever the period of time it is. And like all others, the way I look at the second house, even for this one also, for the fourth house also, I look at the who is the fourth house lord, what is the natal position of the fourth house lord, and which planets did it co-join, the fourth house lord co-joined with, and which houses is the fourth house lord aspecting, and what planets are there in the houses that the fourth house lord aspected. I gather the same information, and then I collect all. This is just a collecting the data phase. So this is how you have to collect the data. The third and the last secondary house that I look for is the eighth house. This is a very important house. Even though I considered it, put it in the secondary phase of analyzing. The eighth house is very important, is because it deals with secret affairs of the NATO or the sexual diseases that the NATO had or will have. And this is something that needs to be looked into it when you are looking for the ability for a person to get married and have a happy home life environment, and there is no marital discord. And at the same time, this might be the reason that this house might be the reason for the need to have multiple divorces, and have multiple marriages too at the same time. So that's the reason why the eighth house is very, very important. And while as usual I look at the eighth house from the destiny, which is Rashi Lagna, and at the eighth house from Chandra Lagna, because that is where the NATO's mind is dealt with. Here are the eighth house. I look at the eighth house lord, its natal position, the planets it co-joined, the houses it aspects, and whatever the planets that are residing in the house that it has aspected. Once I gather all the information, I'll just collect it and use it for my analysis. The last secondary house that I look at is the 11th and the 12th houses together, because this is for the marriage stability. So if the 11th house deals with the house of desires, kamasthanamo, and the 12th house is pleasures of bed. So if the stable married life is possible, whether it is possible for the native to have a stable married life or have frequent marital discords resulting into divorce and having a multiple marriages, the possibility getting divorced and then getting married, then divorced, then getting married, all these things you can see by looking at these two houses. And just like this, for like any other houses, for both 11th house and 12th house, I gathered the same data that I gathered for the first, second, fourth, 7th, 8th, and now 11th and 12th houses also. The last thing that I look at is the 6th house. Very few people rarely look at the 6th house because it is considered to be the Rogasthanamo in general. But the 6th house, when you look from the 7th house, 6th house is the 12th house. So the 12th house again deals with the pleasures of bed. So from the 7th house, 6th house is the 12th house. So it is that same house, 6th house, that now deals with the house is called as house of separation also, the possibility for a house of separation. So that's the reason why when we are looking at a possibility for a native to have multiple marriages or getting divorced, chances for getting divorced, and then chances getting remarried, when you are trying to look at the possibility of all those things, apart from all the houses, the last house that I highly recommend to see is this 6th house, and it is that house that tells you whether the possibility for the house of separation, how strong is the house of separation, and based on that you can tell the previous data that you gathered, then compare with the strength of the house of separation, the 6th house, its lord and all other characteristics, and then you can come to a conclusion what type of marital life will the need to have, and how many marriages, how frequently the need to possibility for the need to get married. What are there any chances for the native to get separated, divorced, or separated, or become a widow? And what will be the situation if the native gets divorced or become a widow and tries to get married again. All these things, the last attempt I do is by looking at the sixth house. So finally, when the way I want to conclude this chronological order of analyzing the houses when it comes to the ability for a native to get married, when you are trying to analyze it or predict it, the chronological order that I do it is what I had shown in the previous slides. And now let me conclude it. The first thing I do is there are three steps. The primary houses that I look is the first house, Tanusthanamo, and the Kalatrasthanamo, the seventh house. I look, and then the secondary houses that I look is the second house, the Kutumbasthanamo, the fourth house, Sukhasthanamo, the eighth house, secret affairs, the 11th house, house of desires or Kamasthanamo, and the 12th house, pleasures of bed. And finally, when I feel that the ability is that for the native is there to get married, then I look for the stability of the marriage. That is through the sixth house. So that's the last stuff that I check out is the house of separation, which is the sixth house. So after analyzing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 houses, even though seventh house is the house that tells you whether a native has the ability to get married or not, I do not analyze only the seventh house. I do go through all these 8 houses to see the validity of the marriage, and is the destiny for this particular native is to get married and have a happy marital life, or is the destiny for this native is better to remain unmarried. In this example that I'm going to show is the destiny of this particular native is better to remain unmarried, which the native has gone against the destiny. And I can show you how the planetary combinations and the planets that are positioned in the natal chart, and of course the transit planets and the Vimsattari Dasa, how they had activated the events so that the native's destiny is being fulfilled. There was an article already that I had in the same YouTube. It's called "Better Remain Unmarried." This is the one that is the continuation of that particular topic. Here I'm going to show like the destiny is better for this particular native is better to remain unmarried. The native has gone against the destiny, wish of the destiny, and got married, not one time, 2 times. He got married with 7 ladies 8 times, and at the end, when the time came for him to at the time of the end of his life, the destiny is the one that won, and he was a single person at the time of his death. So for the final conclusion is that whatever the chart says, whatever the destiny is, it is better to continue with that rather than going against the destiny, and trying to attempt it might create some sort of a mental stress and mental agony only. Now that I had done what is the chronological order that I do the analysis, let me go and give an example of one particular native. This native his name is Larry King. He died on 23rd January 2020. That's just recently, almost just like 2 or 3 weeks ago. And according to the sources, this is in the New York Post on 23rd January. They published a small article called Magnificent 7 Ex-Wives. He had 8 marriages with 7 women, and one of the women he married twice, divorced, and again remarried, and again divorced. So the total is 8 marriages. If you look at it here, the first marriage was in 1952 and lasted for until 1953, very small duration. Then in 1961 and immediately got divorced. again got married immediately and divorced in 1963, and the same girl that he divorced in 1963, the same women he married in 1967 and again divorced in 1972. So even though as of now it is 3 marriages, but 3 girls, but 3 women, but 4 marriages. And then another one is in 1963, divorced 1967, and again in 1976, married and divorced in 1983, 1989, divorced in 92, 1997, divorced 2019. If you look at it, after he got divorced in 2019, at the time he got married, he was a single. So altogether, there were 8 marriages with 7 women, and at the time of his death, he is a single person. That means the destiny seems to be like him to remain as a single until his last breath, but he went against his destiny, and I will prove it how, by going against the destiny, how the planetary combinations will make sure that whatever the things that happen gets nullified. So this is the best example I can take to prove from an astrological perspective why it is always better to remain unmarried for some natives. There was already an article that I put it in the YouTube saying better remain unmarried. If you have a chance, you can view that YouTube video too, where I gave more explanation. I think I took 2 or 3 examples and gave a justification why those 3 natives is good for them to remain unmarried than getting married and getting divorced. As explained earlier in a theoretical way, how I analyze the different houses, even though it is just to look at the possibility for a native to get married, whether it is a first time or multiple times. So this is how I do it. The very first thing, as I said earlier, is I look at the first house. On the left, you see his chart. First and foremost, as soon as you see the chart, what I noticed is that this particular native has Kala Sarpa Yoga, and the Kala Sarpa Yoga, Rahu, wherever he is looking at the 9th house. Direct aspect is on the 9th house. So the very first thing that you have to look at for any Kala Sarpa Yoga is whichever the house that Rahu is residing, or whichever the house that Rahu is aspecting, those 2 houses will be dynamic for this particular native in his or her whole lifetime. So here you can see it is the 9th house. So 2 things are dynamic for this particular native, either the Bhagyasthanamo or the Dharmasthanamo. Since the native was successful financially in his career, so Bhagyasthanamo did not get impacted. So the other alternative is to Dharmasthanamo. So the Dharmasthanamo will be very dynamic for this particular native. So just by looking at the chart without looking anything, because of the Kala Sarpa Yoga, this is something that I can tell immediately, saying that the Dharmasthanamo is very dynamic for this person. So when I say Dharmasthanamo, it can be for a number of other things that can happen. So at this point, we don't know what it is. So we will keep that aside. Then start looking at the individual house analysis. The very first thing I look is the first house. The first house, actually the primary analysis. I will do the primary analysis. The primary analysis is done on the 1st and 7th houses for this particular astrological analysis. The first house lord is Jupiter. Jupiter is the 1st and the 4th house lord. Jupiter is residing in the 10th house. So first thing, it tells you that Jupiter deals with academics, and 10th house is career. So it deals with academics, education, or anything that pertains towards education related stuff is what the Jupiter is. Since it is the 1st house lord residing in the 10th house, that will be the native's career. But the 10th house is owned by Mercury. Mercury is communications. So this particular native's career will be something pertaining to communications and has more impact on education, academics, research institutions, like that. So basically, when we look at this type of chart, the very first thing we say is that either the native will be in academics as a professor, educationalist, or a researcher, or a in a TV, in a communication comes under TV entertainment, and then become a orator or anything like that. So this particular native has a career as a TV host, interviewing the famous people. So that is nothing but communications. The interviewing is also dealt with education and research too. So that his particular the native's career has perfectly matched with the chart. Now the first house lord Jupiter is in 10th house, and let me see, and looks like no planet is aspecting the 10th house. That's very fortunate thing. Then comes the question is Jupiter, the first house lord, which houses is the Jupiter aspecting? Jupiter aspects three houses, has three aspects. The first one is the fifth aspect, which is on the second house, where the second house lord Saturn is residing. That is the biggest drawback, a red flag. I put a red flag at this point. The first house lord is looking at the second house, where the second house lord is residing, and that second house lord is a malefic residing in the second house, and the first house lord is looking there itself. You can say that the kutumbasthanamo or dhanasthanamo for this particular native is completely chaotic. That's this particular event combination will tell us that. The next thing is Jupiter's direct aspect is on the fourth house, that is its own house. Fortunately, it is empty, so we don't need to worry. And then comes Jupiter's ninth aspect. The ninth aspect of Jupiter is on the sixth house. Sixth house is house of separations. Look at it. Jupiter's fifth aspect is on the second house, where the malefic second house lord Saturn is residing. And Jupiter's ninth aspect is on the sixth house, which is the house of separations, and the sixth house lord is Venus. Venus is residing in the house owned by Jupiter. So there is a strong relationship between Venus and Jupiter. That means the first house lord and the sixth house lord are extremely, the relationship between these two lords is extremely strong. So the sixth house always deals with house of separations. The first house lord is now having a contact with the lord who is more inclined towards the separation or getting divorced. That's the most important thing that you can see just by looking at by doing the first house analysis. Next, let's go and look at the seventh house analysis, because we are in the primary phase of doing the analysis. In the primary phase, I look only at the first and seventh houses, that's all. So in the seventh house lord is Mercury. Yep, Mercury is in 12th house. That's a very good sign. That's fine. And 12th house, Mercury is a lord of 7th and 10th houses, residing in the 12th house, co-joined with the 9th house lord Sun. Sometimes Sun is considered to be malefic too, so we have to take with a grain of salt that the Mercury, the 7th house lord, is co-joined with a malefic planet Sun. Next, which is there any house that is aspecting the 12th house? No, there isn't any house that is aspecting the 12th house, so ignore it. And then Mercury has only one aspect, that is on the 6th house. So the 7th house lord is looking at the 6th house. Another thing we need to keep in mind, the first house lord is looking at the 6th house. The 7th house lord residing in the 12th house is looking at the 6th house, and the 7th house lord has co-joined with the Dharmasthanadipati, a malefic Sun. And then comes, since the moon is also in the same is the first house, the 12th house is called the Dushtana houses. If one of the Dushtana houses from moon is the 12th house too. So in the Dushtana house from moon, in the Dushtana house is the 7th house lord residing. So naturally, not only from the destiny side of it, even from the mind side of it also, the native's intentions and the destiny both match. That's the reason this type of situations, there will be some sort of situations where what the native has thought and what the destiny for this particular native will be the same for most of the time. After the primary analysis is done, the next thing is to look at the secondary analysis. The secondary analysis, first and foremost, what we do is the second house analysis and the fourth house analysis. Those are the two very important houses that I look. Second house is because it is the Kutumbasthanamo, and the fourth house is because it is the Sukhasthanamo. So Kutumbasthanamo tells you the ability for the native to start a family, and Sukhasthanamo tells you how the native's home life environment will be. Now, the second house. The lord of the second house is the natural malefic Saturn. He owns the second and third houses. He is residing in the second house. Now, Jupiter, and then who are residing in the which planets are aspecting the second house. The most important thing that I look after that is Jupiter. The Lagnadipati is aspecting the second house, and then comes which houses is the second house lord residing in the second house is aspecting. Saturn, just like Jupiter, Saturn has three aspects. The third aspect is on the fourth house. Remember, fourth house is owned by Jupiter. That means Lagnadipati Jupiter is aspecting the second house where the second house lord is residing, and the second house Saturn is aspecting the fourth house, which is owned again by Jupiter. So there's a strong relationship between Jupiter and Saturn. That I should say it as a first house lord, first and fourth house lord Jupiter, and the second house lord the malefic Saturn. So there is a strong relationship between them. Just like Jupiter, the first and fourth house lord Jupiter had a strong relationship with the sixth house lord Venus. Here the first and fourth house lord Jupiter is now having a strong relationship with the second house lord malefic Saturn. The next is Saturn's direct aspect is on the 8th house, which is not a good sign. And then Saturn's 10th aspect is on the 11th house, which is the house of desires. So a malefic planet is residing in the Kutumbasthanamo, owns the Kutumbasthanamo house, resides in the Kutumbasthanam in his own house, looking at the 8th house, which is secret affairs or secret dealings, and then aspecting the 11th house also, which is the house of desires. This is another negative red flag that I can raise for this particular whenever I see a chart with this type of combination. And then comes the fourth house. Oh, it's the fourth house lord is Jupiter. I already told you what is about the first and the fourth house lord is Jupiter, so it is the same. So overall, by this point, by analyzing the primary houses and the secondary houses, what we can say is that the first and the fourth house lord Jupiter is having a strong relationship with the sixth house lord Venus. The first and fourth house lord Jupiter is having a strong relationship with the second house lord natural malefic Saturn. As a continuation of the secondary analysis, the next thing is to look at the 11th and 12th houses, which talks about the stability of the marriage. In case if the native get married, how stable will that marriage will be. And this is something that I use for when I'm doing the analysis for the marital discord too, or the possibility for a native to get divorced, or is something like that. If there is any such possibilities, these are the two houses that I look to. And the 11th house is because it is the house of desires, and the 12th house is it talks about the pleasures of bed. The 11th house lord is Venus, who is also the 6th house lord residing in the first house, and it has co-joined with the 8th house lord Moon and the 12th house lord Mars. Thus the 11th house lord Venus has co-joined with the first of all, the 11th house lord Venus himself became a functional malefic by becoming the 6th house lord. Moon is and Moon, the 8th house lord, it has co-joined with the 8th house lord Moon. So it has become not only becoming a functional malefic, it has co-joined with another functional malefic, the 8th house lord. And then it has co-joined with the 12th house lord Mars. Mars is a little bit violent planet, and it's not a good sign that the 6th house lord and 8th house lord together joining with the 12th house lord is not at all a good sign. As a part of the secondary analysis, the last house that I look at is the 8th house, which talks about the marriage breakup too, because if the native has any secret dealing, secret affairs with others, you can, and that might be the cause for the marriage breakup. So that's another reason why I look at the 8th house. Here the 8th house lord is moon. Moon is now directly owns a house residing in the first house, so it has co-joined with without 8th house analysis. The 8th house lord is in the first house. It has co-joined with the 6th house lord Venus and the 5th and 12th house lord Mars. Moon is having a direct aspect on the 7th house. And then the most important thing that we have to see is the house that moon owns is the 8th house, and who is aspecting it? The 2nd house lord Saturn residing in the 2nd house is aspecting the 8th house. And also moon might have that, since it is in the first house being a 8th house lord and directly looking at the 7th house, it does indicate that the 8th house, because it is aspecting the Kalatrasthanam or the 7th house, does indicate that there is a possibility for some sort of a secret activities that might have created some disturbances in the native's marital life and which resulted in separation. This is just a possibility. After the 8th house analysis is done, I also look at something called as a possibility for an unconventional marriage. The unconventional marriage possibilities, there are a number of houses that people look at for unconventional marriages. I usually look at the 8th house. There is an article already that I had in the YouTube saying that unconventional marriage and role of the 8th house in unconventional marriages. Also, I also look at the 9th house for unconventional marriages, because 9th house is the Dharmasthanamu, and the unconventional marriages are always possible when the Dharmasthanamu got afflicted. So here if you look at it, who is the Lord? The Dharmasthanadipati is Sun. Sun is a malefic. Some people consider Sun to be a malefic too, and it is residing in the 12th house, and then it is co-joined with Mercury. Mercury is the 7th house lord. So a Dharmasthanadipati first is a malefic and is residing in the house that deals with the pleasures of bed and co-joined with the 7th house lord Mercury. So naturally the events that deals with the marriage and the pleasures of bed will always result into some sort of a unconventional methods. And here, to add further, what I noticed is Rahu is having a direct aspect on the 6th house, 9th house, sorry. Rahu is having a direct aspect on the 9th house. Another reason for the native to tend more towards the something that is against the social norms, that means against the dharma. So these are all the things that you can see from the 9th house when you are looking for any sort of unconventional. Is there a possibility for an unconventional marriage? Like I said earlier, the last thing that I look at is the 6th house. 6th house is the tertiary analysis. The primary is the first and 7th houses. The secondary is 2nd, 4th, 8th, 11th, 12th. The reason I look at the 6th house is because 6th house is considered to be the house of separation, and here both the 11th and the 6th house lord is Venus. We already did an analysis of the role of Venus on this chart. So being a 6th house lord residing in the first house, co-joined with the 8th house lord and co-joined with the 12th house lord and having a direct aspect on the 7th house. This particular stuff is enough from astrological perspective to say that if the native get married, the chances are extremely high for the native to get separated because of this particular combination. Now that I had done the what is the chronological order that I do the analysis, let me go and give an example of one particular native. This native is, his name is Larry King. He died on 23rd January 2020. That's just recently, almost just like 2 or 3 weeks ago. And according to the sources, this is in the New York Post on 23rd January. They published a small article called Magnificent Seven Ex-Wives. He had 8 marriages with 7 women, and one of the women he married twice, married, divorced, and again remarried, and again divorced. So the total is 8 marriages. If you look at it here, the first marriage he had, the first marriage was in 1952 and lasted for until 1953. Very small duration. Then in 1961 he immediately got divorced, again got married immediately and divorced in 1963, and the same girl that he divorced in 1963, the same women he married in 1967 and again divorced in 1972. So even though as of now it is 3 marriages, but 3 girls, but 3 women, but 4 marriages. And then another one is in 1963, divorced 1967, and again in 1976, married and divorced in 1983, 1989, divorced in 92, 1997, divorced 2019. If you look at it, after he got divorced in 2019, at the time he got married, he was a single. So altogether, there were 8 marriages with 7 women, and at the time of his death, he is a single person. That means the destiny seems to be like to him to be remain as a single until his last breath, but he went against his destiny, and I will prove it how, by going against the destiny, how the planetary combinations will make sure that whatever the things that happen gets nullified. So this is the best example I can take to prove from an astrological perspective why it is always better to remain unmarried for some natives. There was already an article that I put it in the YouTube saying better remain unmarried. If you have a chance, you can view that YouTube video too, where I gave more explanation. I think I took 2 or 3 examples and gave a justification why those 3 natives is good for them to remain unmarried than getting married and getting divorced. After doing the chart analysis, let me go and do the Vimsotari Dasa analysis to figure it out what is the reason for this particular native to have multiple marriages. Based on the information that I got it on from the public site, here you can see I just consolidated the lady with whom he got married and the year he got married and the date when they got divorced, and then look at the Vimsotari Dasa respectively. First and the foremost, what I would like to see here is the first he got married in 1952. At that point, it was the Venus Mahadasa and Jupiter Antaradasa. And we all know that Jupiter is the Laganadipati and the 4th house lord, and he is residing in the 10th house and directly having a direct aspect on the 4th house. So naturally, being the Lagnadipati and the 4th house lord will always go for for some sort of a happy home life environment. And then but Venus is the 6th house lord and the 11th house lord residing in the 1st house. Venus residing in the 1st house is just again the same thing because it has a direct aspect on the 7th house, and Venus is the 11th house lord, is the house of desires. So, and also Venus has co-joined with the 12th house lord Mars. So if you look at all this, Venus Mahadasa had a major role in making this particular native to get married, and Jupiter Antardasa helped the native to get married. But immediately after the Jupiter Antardasa, we all know the next Antardasa is Saturn Antardasa. Still the Venus Mahadasa, but the Saturn Antardasa. Here, Saturn is the second house lord residing in the second house, having a direct aspect on the 8th house. And Venus is the 6th house lord, 6th and 11th house lord, having a direct aspect on the 7th house. So, probably when the Venus Mahadasa, Saturn Antaradasa, and Saturn's Pratyantradasa might be the reason when the Neetu had a intention of getting separated, and it might have happened in the Mercury Pratyantradasa. So overall, whatever it is, the first marriage happened in the Venus Mahadasa and Jupiter Antaradasa, and then immediately the Neetu got separated, like in the same Venus Mahadasa but Saturn Antaradasa. The second marriage, third marriage, they both happened during the Sun Mahadasa. And I was surprised to see that the first marriage second marriage happened in the Sun Mahadasa and Rahu Antaradasa, and also got divorced with the same Rahu Antaradasa. So Sun is the 9th house lord residing in the 12th house and having a direct aspect on the 6th house. So it's because Rahu is looking at the 9th house, Sun Mahadasa, during the Sun Mahadasa and Rahu Mahadasa, something adharma has to happen. And looks like because Sun is in the 12th house, which is the pleasures of bed, he got married at that time. And again, Sun is having a direct aspect on the 6th house, which is the house of separations, and Rahu having the direct aspect on the 9th house owned by Sun. Probably the Neetu got separated as soon as he got married. Then from 53 to 61 he did not get married. Remember, still in 61 he got married. So still it is the Sun Mahadasa that is still running for this particular Neetu when his third marriage happened, which is the Sun Mahadasa and the Mars Antaradasa. Mars is the 12th house lord residing in the first house, having a direct aspect on the 7th house. So Mars has initiated it. Sun, as I told earlier, Sun is that 9th house Dharmasthanadpati residing in the 12th house. 12th house is pleasures of bed, and Mars owns the 12th house. So that might be the reason why the Neetu got married in 1961. But as soon as the Saturn Antaradasa came, he got separated. There's nothing to be done there. And then the fourth marriage happened again in Saturn Mahadasa and Sun Mahadasa and Saturn Antaradasa. It's very surprising to see this particular Neetu, how the planets had made this particular Neetu to get married. Even when the destiny is for this particular Neetu is not to get married, when the Neetu has gone against the destiny, look at the way the planetary combinations had forced the Neetu to accept the destiny. He tried it 8 times, married in 8 times, and all the 8 times he got separated. He got married and he got separated. The same way you see it after the Sun, even the Moon Mahadasa. Moon is the 8th house lord residing in the first house, having a direct aspect on the 7th house. So Moon Mahadasa doesn't work out at all for anything. And then the minute the Rahu Mahadasa came somewhere in 1983, for 18 years Rahu Mahadasa was there, all the way till I should say it as all the way till 1997. The Rahu Mahadasa is there, and it is the Rahu Mahadasa that had messed up him completely. Remember, Rahu is having a direct aspect on Dharmasthanamu, and naturally whatever adharma is supposed to happen will happen during the Rahu Mahadasa. That's what has happened for this particular Neetu. And the transit planets might be activating all these type of activities. But if you look at the last marriage, that is the 8th marriage, he got divorced in 2019. That is the Saturn Rahu. After Rahu should be the I think, yeah, in 2019 Saturn Mahadasa started. So but the reason from 2007 till 2017 he remained married for the whole 16 years is because it was the Jupiter Mahadasa, Jupiter is the Lagnadipati and the 4th house lord, residing in the 10th house and having a direct aspect on the 4th house, the one it owns. That's the reason why for the whole 16 years, the 8th marriage, which he got married in 1997, lasted all the way till 2019, is only because Jupiter was there. It's a Jupiter Mahadasa. Jupiter is the Lagnadipati and Jupiter is the Sukhasthanadipati, 4th house lord, residing in the Karmasthanamo, the 10th house, and Jupiter is having a direct aspect on the 4th house which it owns. The same Vimsottari Dasa analysis, I just did it a little bit detailed to show you that the 6th house lord Venus and in 1st house and with Jupiter made him got married, but Saturn Antardasa is the one that had separated him. The 9th house lord is Sun, and Sun is the Dharmasthanadipati residing in the 12th house, which is the pleasures of bed, and Rahu is having a direct aspect on the house owned by Sun. So Sun Rahu Mahadasa might have started, but at the same time Sun is having a direct aspect on the 6th house, which is the house of separation. So that might be the reason why he got separated. It's a short marriage. You can hardly see it, 61-61 on both the sides. And then comes the most important thing is him not getting married from 1953 till 1961. That is, the Sun Mahadasa still running during that 7 years. So Sun having a direct aspect on the 6th house might not had initiated anymore. We don't know exactly why. Even if the NATO had got married, he would have got separated. So that's a different question here. And we can, like that, you can see it in 1961. He got married in 61 and got separated immediately in 1963. That is the same Sun Mahadasa. But if you look at it, almost all the time, the separation is is during the Saturn Antaradasa. That's what the point I want to highlight here is the Saturn Antaradasa and Rahu Antaradasa. These are the two Antaradasas that are the primary reasons for most of his separations, because Saturn is a malefic owning the 2nd house, Kutumbasthanamo, and he is residing in the 2nd house. And he's having a direct aspect on the 8th house. And of course, the 3rd aspect is on the 4th house, which is the Sukhasthanamo, and the 9, 8, 7, 8, 9, 10. And the 10th aspect is on the 11th house, which is the Kamasthanamo. So Saturn, the natural malefic, became much stronger by residing in his own house, owning the Kutumbasthanamo, being the Kutumbasthanadipati, had created havoc in Sukhasthanamo, which is the home life environment, and then the 8th house, secret affairs, and then the 11th house, Kamasthanamo. So that's another reason why most of these marriages failed during the Saturn Antaradasa. And as usual, Rahu is residing in the house owned by Saturn. That's the 3rd house. But from Rahu's direct aspect is on the 9th house, the Dharmasthanamo. As I said earlier, Rahu, wherever he is, he will create a chaos in the house he is residing and the house he is having a direct aspect. We don't know what type of chaos the Rahu has created in the 3rd house for this particular native. 3rd house is the siblings, so we don't know anything about it. But him having a direct aspect on the 9th house, which is the Dharmasthanamo and Bhagyasthanamo, while he did not create any mess with respect to Bhagyasthanamo, he did create a lot of mess with respect to Dharmasthanamo. And since the Dharmasthanadipati is in the 12th house, which is directly deals with the pleasures of bed, and the lot of other activities happened, the chaos that Rahu has created in respect to having again for the native to go against the Dharma is most of the time pertaining to his marital life. As usual, after I do all the analysis, I just have a quick look at the Bihurugu Chakra Paddhati just to see what has happened. This is out of my curiosity I did all these things. Okay, the first marriage when it happened, Mercury was the cycle ruler and Mercury activated the 7th house. Mercury is uh, from Rashi Lagna and Chandra Lagna, the 7th house lord is itself is Mercury. So when Mercury activated the 7th house, if you look at it, it is the house that it owns. 7th house is Kalatrasthanamo. But from his natal position, when Mercury activated the 7th house, it is the 6th house, house of separations. So that's the reason why he just got married, and in a short period of time, he got separated. You can see in Wikipedia, it was so short period that he got married, and very soon he got separated. And that's the reason why Mercury, when it activated the 7th house from Rashi Lagna, he got married. And when at the same time Mercury also activated the 7th house from his natal position, which is the 6th house, house of separations, so he got separated immediately. And then comes the Venus cycle ruler. It was the Venus cycle ruler for most of the time that he got the 2nd, the 3rd, and the 4th marriages happened during the Venus cycle ruler. Venus is the 6th house, 6th and 11th house lord residing in the 1st house, having a direct aspect on the 7th house. So Venus has activated the marriages, but it was the Antardasas and Pratyantardasas of other planets, malefic planets, that had forced the Netu to get separated. And Venus, being the 6th house lord, played a semi-partial role in getting separated from the spouse. And then the 5th one happened when the cycle ruler was Sun. Cycle at that time, Sun activated the 7th house. As usual, Sun, when it activated the 7th house from Rashi Lagna, it was the Mercury house. The house is owned by Mercury, and Sun and Mercury are co-joining in the 12th house. So naturally, the 12th house is pleasures of bed. The Netu got married, but at the same time, the 7th house from its natal position is again the 6th house. Just like when Mercury activated the 7th house, the Netu couldn't, marital life was very short. Here also, when Sun activated the 7th house, the Netu's marital life is also very short. The next one, the 6th one, is in Mars cycle ruler, and when Mars activated the 8th house, this is something surprising, that when the 12th house lord residing in the 1st house, when it activates the 8th house, I'm surprised to see how the Netu got married, because if you look at it, Mars is in the 1st house. So when it activates the 8th house from Rashi Lagna or from its natal position, it's the same house which is owned by Moon, and Moon is co-joined with Mars. So it's a little bit surprising to see for how this 6th marriage happened and why it lasted that long. And the last marriage that happened was in November in 1997. That was the 7th woman. Actually, it was just the 8th marriage, but the 7th woman, because he got married to the same girl twice. Married once, divorced, few years later married her again and divorced her again. So the last marriage which happened in 1997, look at it. It was a Jupiter is the cycle ruler. That's the reason why this particular Netu, when he got married in 1997, he had the marital, he divorced in 2019. The whole period from 1997 to 2019, the Jupiter Mahadasa is running over there. At the time of marriage, Jupiter is the one that has the cycle ruler. So naturally, if Jupiter is the one is the cycle ruler in the year, this is the 4th house. That means there are 8 more years. For the next 8 years, from 1997, it's the same. Jupiter will be the cycle ruler. So he will not do any mess, because he's a benefic planet in general, and Jupiter is the Lagnadipati and the 4th house lord, being residing in the Karmasthanamo 10th house, has a direct aspect on the 4th house. So this is the reason why the Jupiter Mahadasa is very, very important for every Netu, irrespective of what is the natal position of Jupiter. If the natal position of Jupiter is very good, then that particular Mahadasa will be very good. If otherwise, it will be moderate, but it's not like any other planet. If the natal position is not good, then the Mahadasa will be bad. Jupiter is an exception here in general for any Netu.